I'm prepared to begin a separate discussion about my budget, but not under the threat of default.
I would hope that he'd be willing to negotiate so we could actually solve this problem and not take America on the brink.
For the 21st time this century, Republicans and Democrats are debating over the debt ceiling, or the total amount of money the U.S. government is allowed to borrow to pay for its spending.
They didn't produce a budget. What they did was produce a ransom note.
The United States is not going to default.
But uncertainty over how to raise the debt ceiling has reached a level not seen in years, in part due to the narrowest House Republican majority in decades that has conditioned a debt increase on spending cuts. Hanging in the balance is the full faith and credit of the United States and a possible economic calamity.
If the Congress does not authorize additional borrowing, it would be an unprecedented event that economists say could cause a recession or a global financial crisis.
For years, this was done without much controversy. But in recent years, the federal debt has grown significantly as Republicans have broadly opposed tax increases and Democrats have broadly resisted calls to cut spending.
Our country is on an unsustainable debt path. The debt's growing faster than the economy.
It's going to very substantially worsen in the next 3 decades unless some major changes are implemented, both on the revenue side and on the spending side.
We're looking at major funding shortfalls for Social Security and Medicare that could materialize within the next decade.
Experts say that failing to raise the debt ceiling would be catastrophic for the economy, but failing to curb deficits could also threaten its long-term health.
If we breach the debt ceiling, the value of Treasury bonds is going to collapse as investors demand an ever higher premium on newly issued debt.
I fear that if lawmakers take this right up to the X date, the turmoil in markets will be so significant that it undermines what confidence is left and pushes us into a recession.
We're not looking at just a crisis for the US economy, although that is a potential outcome here. We are looking at a fundamental building block of the global economy being knocked out.
This is a cycle. I predict to you that a lot of those new members who came here with my way or the highway, they'll either be on the highway or they'll learn that they have to have compromise.
Republicans and Democrats have increasingly used the debt ceiling as leverage for spending concessions. And at times, the closer the U.S. got to default, the more significant the concessions.
The pressures that led to 2011 are still pretty much the same pressures that are at work today.
In 2011, Congress enacted broad spending cuts in exchange for lifting the debt ceiling. House Republicans are now trying to again leverage the debt ceiling to extract even larger spending concessions than what was included in the 2011 deal.
We are headed to a fiscal cliff in this country. And rather than trying to slow down and find an off-ramp, our president and Chuck Schumer and the Democrats in the Senate seem to be pushing down hard on the accelerator.
We've been talking about the debt for so long that I think people assume that things are only as bad today as they were 10 years ago and 20 years ago, because we were talking about it then too.
For months, President Biden refused to do what Vice President Biden did in 2011, negotiate over the debt ceiling.
The reality is that this town has routinely tied these issues together, as evidenced by the fact that the 7 most recent budgetary controls enacted by Congress came about as a part of the debt ceiling negotiations.
The House Republican plan would return spending to 2022 levels, but it does not specify the exact agencies or programs that it would cut.
It's a way for both sides to claim, hey, we're getting the budget under control without getting into the weeds of what they're actually going to cut yet. The danger being that once they get into trying to decide how to cut and meet the new caps, I think they'll find them to be much more difficult to meet in practice than in theory.
The narrowest House majority in decades has further complicated the negotiations and has raised the stakes for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
This does feel different. We are getting very, very close, and I think the different dynamic here is that you have the House Republican majority that is just so razor thin. Even among House Republicans realize they might not have all the votes.
It was really unclear whether Kevin McCarthy would secure enough votes to become Speaker. And as part of that process, he gave in several meaningful concessions to House conservative backbenchers that stipulated that they would be able to essentially challenge his speakership at any point. And the underlying debate there was over whether McCarthy would really push hard enough to secure concessions over this fight, over the fight over spending and over the debt limit.
Any agreement must garner 60 votes in the Senate, and even some Democrats have pushed Biden to compromise on spending with Republicans.
Hopefully put everybody at the table and start to come up with some top line numbers, and both sides feel they give a little bit and not happy necessarily with the deal, but a deal's been struck. That's a good deal.
But any deal is likely to contain provisions that some House Republicans oppose, potentially jeopardizing McCarthy's speakership.
But when you start talking about funding the government, that could be the first time we can see McCarthy's speakership really become tenuous. And, if they do not appease those conservatives and what they want, you could see one of them raising their hand and saying, I motion to vacate Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
What's a red line? It's whatever our conference tells us their red line is.
We're not going to pass any solution that's got new taxes. The time has come for us to talk about the growth of discretionary spending in this country. And I have every expectation that the deal Kevin McCarthy cuts will have the support of a majority of his conference. I think it should. I think that would best serve the interests of the country.
11th hour deals have staved off default in previous debt limit fights, but congressional observers remain unsure how this fight ends.
This is one of those times where there are some people who aren't clearly intent on making sure we raise the debt ceiling.
The probability that you get into one of those darker scenarios is much higher than it has been in previous debt limit debates. It's still low.
I think the odds are very good that they will come to an agreement on how to raise it. The risk is they lose control of the process through brinkmanship. They say, well, we don't want that to happen, but then they have a difficulty corralling their own votes to avoid it not happening.
10 years ago, we were talking about bipartisan compromises to cut spending and raise taxes. Now that conversation has completely moved to a situation where Democrats won't entertain any new spending cuts, really, and Republicans won't entertain any new tax hikes. Shows just how far away we've moved for an actual solution to the debt problem.